Okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Cristiane. I'm an exercise therapist with Simply Health Solutions. And today is my last presentation on my balance series. And today we're going to be talking about coordination and gait and how these two concepts are actually really important if we're thinking about balance training and trying to reduce our risk of falls. Because a lot of seniors are really nervous about having a fall. Probably out of every client I ever work with, that's the big thing that a lot of people are really worried about is having a fall. In particular, a lot of people that I work with are in assisted living. And that is actually a very major concern because depending on provinces, I think different provinces have different rules. But at least where I am, a lot of assisted living facilities don't really have staff that are able to help you up from the ground if you do have a fall. So it requires a call from an ambulance and it kind of becomes a whole big deal. And so a lot of seniors that I work with are really nervous about having falls and really conscious about it and trying to find ways to reduce their risk of having a fall. But there are various exercises to help. As you've kind of seen in the overall balance series, it's not that there's one exact exercise that will magically improve your balance. It's a matter of working on a couple of different things, and everybody's going to be a little bit different. So maybe one person needs a little bit more of one particular exercise, maybe another person needs a different type of exercise, especially depending on your medical history. As if, let's say, if you've had heart disease, or if you're a diabetic, or if you've had a stroke, all those things are going to play a role in what kind of exercises might be especially helpful in your case. However, improving our gait and coordination is a really great start. And that's one thing that we can do to try to improve our balance and improve our falls risk. So for today, I'm going to be talking about what is gait, what is coordination, how does it actually help, some common dysfunctions, right? So, like I said, there's going to be tons of different reasons why somebody's gait or coordination might be off. But I just kind of listed off a couple of things that might be helpful, and then a couple of common exercises that might be a good way to start and kind of see where you are in terms of these exercises, because maybe if you're really struggling with some of those exercises, that might be something you want to do more of, versus maybe other ones are super simple, super easy, and then you don't have to focus as much on those ones. Always keep your own medical history in mind when doing a new exercise routine, and always talk to your doctor or a exercise a therapist if you have questions or you want to go over something specific. So, how does it help? So, gait is the fancy rehab word for how we walk on a regular basis. So, a lot of us talk about, gait analysis, which is when we get a new client, we kind of observe how you walk. We try to see, if there are things that are a little bit off. I remember when I was at York University, I was finishing up my master's. I always thought it was funny because St. George Station has that really long hallway, and I always kind of observed people's gaits while going down that hallway, and I found it a good practice of just observing people walking, seeing if like I could figure out kind of what was throwing them off. So it actually is a really big important tool in our rehab toolbox. And it's affected by various different factors. It could be previous injuries. I see this a lot in people who have, let's say, had a hip replacement, or maybe have arthritis on the one side, or maybe had a stroke, where basically one side has been affected by some sort of injury or illness. And so it's kind of thrown off their entire way of walking. Or the other one that I always find kind of interesting is if somebody had some sort of maybe foot injury. So they were in a cast or an air boot. And, so your body kind of has to figure out a way to walk differently with that cast or the air boot. But once you take it off, a lot of people don't realize that you're still walking the way that your body used to when you had the cast. So your gait has kind of been thrown off, but because we're not paying attention to it, we haven't actually tried to fix it and bring it back to normal. And then just general health. So, I often think of, let's say, diabetics where they're kind of losing maybe a little bit of feeling in their feet, might kind of throw off your gait a little bit, trying to adjust to that. Maybe if you've got some cognitive issues. So, again, maybe if you've had a stroke, where it kind of threw off a little bit of your brain function. And while you're going through rehab, while you're trying to get back to your previous abilities, sometimes your gait gets thrown off a little bit. And then coordination is our ability to perform smooth and controlled movements. So, for those who this is not necessarily an issue, we don't often think about it. And I always think about, um, if you're trying to reach for something. So, if you're trying to reach for a glass on the table, we don't actually think about all of the stuff that is going on in your brain to make sure that happens smoothly. But we see it in, let's say, somebody who's got Parkinson's, who might have very jittery, very shaky movements, or somebody who's had a stroke and maybe in the part of the brain that has affected their coordination, or sometimes even people, if you're developing vision problems, the coordination actually is partially involved with our vision as well. So there's all these different factors that are actually heavily involved in our coordination. And like I said, we often don't realize how much is actually going on until something goes wrong. And it involves various different factors because if you think of trying to reach for a glass on the table, you have to think about how quickly you're gonna reach your arm out, right? Because if you go too quick, then, you might knock it over, but too slow, then you get a bit impatient. The strength to be able to even lift your arm, again, this is one of those things where we don't really think about until something goes wrong, but our arms do have a certain amount of weight, and some people, if your arm strength has gotten so weak, it might actually be difficult for you to lift your arm, and reach forward, and then timing, exact direction, the angle. There's so many different parts of the brain that are heavily involved in all of this that it does take practice. And that was maybe something we did when we were very little. But as we get older, or if we've had a medical issue, it might be something that we want to go back and review. And so problems with coordination and gait can lead to various different things. Can lead to falls, injuries, reduced quality of life. I've worked with somebody who, because their gait and their coordination was so off, she was actually very scared to even make a meal at her kitchen counter because she was so scared to just try to like reach for things and walk around slightly. She was so worried about her falls risk, that it actually did really reduce her quality of life, her ability to maybe go out for a walk with her friends. So all of these little things, right, that we don't really think about, they do start to add up, and they do honestly affect our quality of life. And the thing is, gait and coordination are just so important for all of these different things in life. So whether you're going for a walk with friends, if you're trying to reach for something, whether it's, shoulder height, above, below, all of that is important for coordination. Even just standing still, we need a little bit of coordination, a little bit of gait, making sure we're kind of evenly balanced. And then when we're trying to exercise, whether it's a dance class or yoga or tai chi, all of these different things, all these different movements, we do need that gait and that coordination, to make sure that we're doing things properly. A couple of common causes for dysfunction. Again, this is not an exhaustive list, just kind of a couple of things that might pop up when we are doing a gait analysis, or when we are kind of seeing how a person is doing in terms of their exercise and their movement. So the first one is, there is a muscle kind of on the side of our hips. Kind of if you think of if you were to put your hands in your side pockets, kind of around that area that are called abductors. And those ones are actually very, very important. Helps keep the hip nice and level. So if those become weak, it can cause other problems. Really kind of throws off our gait. It can cause back problems, shoulder problems. Um, Depending on the particular gait pattern, we actually call it a Trendelenburg gait. So it's actually a very, very specific one that we actually look for. And it's often caused because one of those muscles are not strong enough. The interesting thing is some people will have too weak on, let's say, the outside of their hips, but then too tight on the inside. So our adductors are kind of our inner thigh muscles, and sometimes those can get really, really tight. And one reason why that becomes a bit of a problem is if you're walking, you have, one foot in front of the other. But if your inner thighs are too tight, sometimes there's a little bit, they get a little too close. And sometimes if they're really bad, there's a little bit of that crossover where people are kind of like walking over one foot over the other. So, and that can cause other problems too, like can cause some nerve issues, can cause some chronic pain issues. So we really want to take a look at that as well. Weak hip extensors, so kind of like the muscles behind your leg. So even if you think of you're sitting right now, it's kind of the muscles you're kind of sitting on, kind of behind your thigh, yeah, kind of behind your thighs. And if those don't aren't strong enough, what ends up happening is it can cause a couple of different problems, but one issue that can come up is when you're walking, you're not really able to kind of push yourself forward as much because those muscles are actually super important to getting us moving forward. So if they're too weak, it can cause other problems. And what I've noticed is people who are very weak in that area, again, it can kind of throw off like your back, your shoulders. We often don't realize that problems in one area can actually lead to problems in other areas. So sometimes, if you're having an ankle issue, it can cause hip problems. But then if that goes on for a long time, even that ankle issue can start causing shoulder issues because your body has had to adjust and adapt due to that injury if we're not treating that injury. Our bodies kind of do that. It figures out a way to adapt our movements with injuries, which is not necessarily a bad thing in the short term, but long term it can cause other problems. So we do want to try to take a look at it as soon as we can. On the other side, so we have the muscles behind our legs, which are our extensors. And then we have the ones kind of on top of our legs, known as our flexors. So those are the muscles that actually bring your knee up. So, and then when you're walking, you don't necessarily have to have your knees super high, but if you're not able to really bring that leg forward, again, can cause other problems when you're trying to walk. Because both sides are going to be very important. You need the one leg or the one muscle to kind of bring the leg forward, but then you also need the muscles behind you to kind of push you forward. Then you have what we call ankle dorsiflexors. Basically, the muscles kind of right on top of your foot. This is really important when it comes to balance because it allows you to lift your toes. So some people have something that we call foot drop, where for whatever reason they have a very, very hard time lifting that toe when they're walking, and that can cause problems, especially when you're walking, you might like trip over like very tiny, tiny things. So it'll kind of depend on what is the cause of that foot drop. For some people, maybe it's just some weakness that we've never really paid attention to. So it's just gotten worse over a couple of years. Some people, if there actually is like a nerve issue, this is going to be kind of a secondary issue. I remember at one point I hurt my leg really, really bad. And one of the things was I really couldn't like lift my big toe. Like all like the therapist literally just had to slightly put their finger on my toe and I could not lift it. And that wasn't necessarily due to weakness in that that exact toe, but it was a nerve issue that was a little bit higher up. So again, a lot of these maybe there's some weakness there or maybe some tightness. There's going to be that part of thinking about what is causing this issue. Is it just kind of something, maybe a habit that we've had for a long time? Or is it something maybe we want to have like a therapist take a look at and just make sure that there isn't another higher up issue that's kind of going on? And then lastly, we have our calves. So kind of that big muscle kind of in our lower leg. Really, really important for movement. It's another one of those muscles that helps propel us forward. So if those are weak, we can wind up with just issues kind of trying to move forward, especially if you think of if you're going for a leisurely stroll, you might not really notice it. But if you're trying to kind of go a little bit quick, like you're trying to like catch the bus or something, or you're trying to get in line for like at the grocery store, you start to kind of notice it that it's like you're not propelling kind of as quickly as you would like. So like I said, there's a couple of different things that could be going on. Always good to kind of get somebody to take a look at it. These are kind of just a couple of exercises that might be worth looking into. Uh, So the first one is strengthening those hip abduction muscles, the ones on the outside. So all you have to do is grab something sturdy. Make sure, whether it's a chair, a table, a counter, make sure it's sturdy. Because if you find you're kind of like losing your balance while holding on to a chair, you might want to grab something like a table or a counter. If you find your balance is a little bit off. But the really important thing for this, I find, is you're standing nice and tall, you're lifting the leg out and in, but make sure you're keeping that hip nice and level. Because often what happens is your body, it thinks all it cares about is, well, okay, we're just trying to lift the leg. And so your whole body might start tilting. And then now that's not really an exercise on that leg. Now other muscles are starting to take over and it'll try to help. And with a lot of exercises, if we're not really paying attention, sometimes what happens is the weak muscle, you're trying to activate the weak muscle, but all of your stronger muscles kick in because they're trying to help, right? Again, short term, good idea. Long term, not so much. So this is a really, really helpful one. If you've got kind of that hip imbalance, if you find like one side kind of constantly drops. So it is important to kind of make sure that that one's doing well. If this is a little bit too easy for you, one thing you could do is actually just, if you lay down in bed, make sure your hip and back are nice and straight, and then try to lift the leg. Now with that change in gravity, your leg weighs a lot more, and it's going to be a little bit more challenging. Do make sure that like you're nice and lined up. Like if you've got a really soft mattress, you're not really going to get that muscle going. So again, there's kind of different ways that you can do it. This one, I find a lot of people really struggle with this one. So it is a really important one to kind of go over, make sure you're doing it okay. My one caution is if be careful if you've had a hip or knee replacement, right? If it's recent, you want to make sure you're still within your if you still got those precautions, right? 'Cause this is one of the things we tell you to avoid when you're fresh off of a hip or knee replacement. But if maybe it's been a couple of years, just be gentle, right? Be gentle with it, see how you feel. But I've had a lot of people where they're physically incapable of getting into this position because that muscle has gotten so tight. So you can either start with this, but for some people, if this is really, really tight for you, maybe just try
In the
having one leg
fall,
straight.
I don't
Um,
think I've got some beautiful.
um, what you can do is just have one leg straight, and then you cross over the other leg, but kind of closer to your ankle. And then what the idea is kind of slowly as you're getting better, you're able to bring that bent leg a little bit higher and higher and higher up the leg so that you can eventually do this. I did have I remember I had one client long, long time ago who that's basically what happened. Like there is no way she could have ever gotten into that position because her hips were just that tight. And even the very gentle kind of crossing over, even that was really like tight for her. But then with practice, kind of slowly, kind of every day, she did a little bit more, and she was eventually able to actually get into that full position. But it just took that little bit of kind of consistent, little bit gentle stretching. It's not about kind of like trying to like shove it down and press it really hard because you could really hurt yourself that way. But you just go until your body is willing to do that stretch and nice and relaxed. So we shouldn't be very tense and in a lot of pain, but it's just as long as you're feeling maybe a little bit of discomfort of that, like that stretching feeling, but there shouldn't be any sort of pain associated with it. But the other reason I really like this exercise is it's a very functional exercise, right? So like putting your socks on, putting your shoes on, clipping your toenails, right? So again, it's that quality of life piece as well, I think is really helpful. Plus this can also if that muscle gets really tight, can cause other issues down the road, which get really uncomfortable. So I always try to kind of get ahead of those sorts of things. So I do really encourage this exercise. Then we have hip extension. So getting that muscle behind us to become nice and strong. One thing that I often see with this one is, again, your body's trying to help you. And what happens is, as you're bringing that leg back, your whole upper body starts bending forward because it's, again, trying to help. And it figures that that is kind of what you're trying to do. So it's just kind of helping you along the way. So making sure you are staying nice and tall, and bringing that leg kind of as back as you can while staying tall and then forwards. You might find maybe maybe if you're really tight kind of in the front of your legs, maybe you're having a little bit of trouble, not because of the weakness in the back, but maybe you're really tight in the front. Either way, something like this can be really helpful. If you're finding this is too easy, what you can do is just when you're laying in bed, again, if it's not too soft, if it's too soft, you kind of sink in, can be really uncomfortable for your back. But if your mattress is decently kind of hard, just laying down on your stomach and trying to lift your leg kind of while laying on your bed. That could be another way that you're making it a little bit harder because now gravity is not going to be helping you. It's actually going to make it harder. But that's one way you can try to strengthen it, which can be really helpful. And so that was the back of the leg. Then we've got the front of the leg, right? So doing that kind of marching, nice and tall. Like I said, body has a tendency to try to make it easy for you, try to help. So oftentimes our bodies tend to curl and it's trying to make it a little bit easier. But we're just trying to stay nice and tall and marching. If you're really struggling with your balance, maybe do this while you're sitting, sitting in a chair and doing some high marches. So there's always ways that you can kind of customize an exercise based on your current abilities, right? You never want to do an exercise where you're putting yourself at risk of a fall or of an injury when you're doing your exercises. You're just kind of modifying as you see fit. Then we've got those toe raises, right? So just making sure that we're staying nice and tall, lifting our toes, not going so far back that, we're risking falling backwards, especially if you're holding onto a chair, which is why I usually recommend this exercise, holding onto a counter. Because then sometimes I find people, they're trying to lift their toes too high and that muscle, it only goes so high. Like it's not supposed to, go up a whole ton. It just kind of goes up slightly, but it's that slight that you really, really need. If you find you're really struggling with this, like you really just absolutely cannot lift that toe, I would kind of follow up with some sort of either exercise therapist, physio, or your doctor, and just making sure that it's like, oh, is this a muscle problem? Is this a muscle weakness, or is it a nerve issue? Right? Because if it's a nerve issue, there might be something a little bit higher up the chain that might be going on. So just keeping that in the back of your head. And then we've got heel raises, right? So making sure that that we're able to kind of stand up on our toes and really try to strengthen those calves. If you have any sort of kind of lower body swelling, this can also be really helpful. So, heart condition or just any other condition where like you're kind of getting some swelling in your legs, this can be one way that to be a little bit helpful to try to get um, those fluids kind of pumped out because we always think of our calves as our second heart of the body. It does help to kind of pump fluid out of that lower body. So this can be helpful even in that sense. So just like I said, just gentle. We're not trying to do too much. We're not trying to go overly crazy with it. And again, if you're feeling a little bit like you're trying really, really hard, but you're really, really struggling, again, maybe follow up with an exercise therapist or your doctor and just kind of maybe have a look at it. The other thing, this is a little bit more on that coordination side of things, but one thing you could also do is what they call ladder drills. And this is kind of like the very, very first start. You can get really fancy with ladder drills. There's tons of different options and tons of ways that you can do it. But even just trying to stand up nice and tall, whether you need your cane, your walker, any sort of assistance. Maybe do this along a wall so you've got something to help you with your balance. But even just practicing, like, am I taking like really good steps? Or because sometimes, depending on what's going on, maybe what some people do is they take one step and then the other foot um, matches, and then one step and matches, as opposed to kind of one step and then kind of moving forward. So sometimes that's maybe you've always used your stronger leg and the weaker leg just kind of plays catch up as you're walking. So just trying to be a little bit more aware of your walking, trying to be nice and tall. The other thing you might notice is you want to take your time with this exercise because what can happen is if you're going quickly, it's actually not that hard. It's actually harder when you're going slowly because that's when you'll really notice, hey, spending time on this weaker side, like, is really kind of throwing me off. So just trying to be nice and slow, take your time with it. And you don't need like a fancy ladder. Like, even if you've got tile floors somewhere in your house, or you can just put little markers kind of along the floor, right? Or it doesn't have to be anything fancy, but it's just kind of, am I taking full strides? Am I really kind of taking really good steps? Once you're really getting a good handle of this exercise, there's tons of ways you can kind of move around, right? You can take wide steps and narrow steps and alternating, and there's tons of ways that you can modify it, but I usually like just starting with this one first and then kind of going from there. Another really great coordination exercise that can be really helpful is, you know, um, some people call them clocks, some people call them star drills. But basically, it's just where like we're standing nice and tall, whether you need a cane, walker, counter, just anything, making sure you're safe. But it's just toe tapping, right? So you're just kind of standing on the one leg, and depending on what your strength is like. So maybe if your feet are a little bit on the weaker side, maybe you're taking a step and then together, and step together, step together. But if you're a little bit stronger, what you can do is kind of step and then kind of keep this leg a little bit you're just slightly tapping on the floor, and then tap and tap, and you can kind of play around with it. Like, there's no specific order you have to go in, but it's you're trying to stand on on the straight leg, or the leg you're standing on. You're trying to keep the weight on that leg kind of as long as possible, and maybe just try to do 5 taps at the beginning. Maybe if you're starting to get a little stronger, maybe do work your way up to 7, right? And then just kind of play around with it. It doesn't have to be in a specific order, doesn't have to be anything too fancy. It's just that idea of you're standing on that one leg while the other leg is moving. And that can actually really throw off your balance, which can be really helpful because if you think of when you're walking, right, both legs are kind of in constant motion. So you do want to keep those legs kind of moving and getting used to, one leg is you're standing on the one leg and the other one is in motion. And then you switch over to the other side. You might find that one side is a lot easier to do than the other side. And a part of that is somewhat normal, because what I often find is people when they are, kind of in their day-to-day lives, tend to have, like, a favorite side. Like, if you're standing maybe at your kitchen counter, um, you just find that you always tend to stand on the one leg, instead of the other leg, or maybe when you're going up a flight of stairs, you're always going with the stronger leg, so something like this can actually be really helpful because it'll show you if there is a significant difference between the two. Like I said, there tends to be even the slightest bit of difference. Because maybe if you've got some arthritis on the one side, then your body doesn't really want to spend too much time on that side. So a little bit is not bad, but if it's significant, then that's something that you can try to work on. And then lastly, if we're working on our kind of balance and coordination, even just trying to kind of stand at a counter, chair, and just nice and tall. And um, for some people, you might want to stand on both legs, right? If this is kind of new to you, and then it's just the idea of just trying to reach forward, right? So maybe going over your counter or maybe your kitchen table or over your couch. I wouldn't recommend necessarily a chair because I just worry about if you really needed that chair, it might slide away from you. So maybe like the back of your couch, a heavy table, something like that, but it's just yeah, you're just kind of reaching forward and just seeing if you're able to be comfortable at reaching forward, kind of moving that base of supports and just getting a little bit more comfortable with that. And if that's getting easier, then doing it on a single leg. And again, make sure you're alternating, right? Don't just use your favorite leg. Make sure we're doing both legs. And just trying to be relatively even with them, right? So trying to just make sure that both legs are staying relatively strong and that they are staying nice and mobile and flexible as well. So this again, very functional exercise. It's, if you're reaching for something, you may not necessarily be reaching with just on the one leg, but even just getting comfortable kind of, and it doesn't have to just be forward. You can do kind of sideways, right? You can kind of cross over, do a little bit of rotation, over to the side, over to the other side. There's tons of ways that you can kind of make it fun, like when it comes to exercise, I try to make it so that it's interesting, it's something you wanna do. Don't think of it as something that, you're dreading to do because then long term, it's very hard to do an exercise and to do something, consistently if you're just miserable the whole time, right? So try to make it fun, maybe do it with a couple of friends, add some music, maybe do it, maybe after every if let's say you're watching a TV show, maybe after every like 10 minutes or after every episode, maybe just get up, do a couple of movements, and then get back to whatever it is that you were doing. Or the other thing you can do is just incorporate it into your everyday life. So maybe if you're in the kitchen and you're kind of doing something, maybe just do some practice reaching, kind of, so make it a little bit harder. There was this I can't remember the doctor's name, but I remember seeing a video online many, many years ago, and it was a doctor, and he was just saying, like, we've gotta make our lives harder. We've spent basically our entire human evolution making lives easier, but now we actually have to try to make them harder. So the idea of, if we're going up one flight of stairs, maybe do the one flight of stairs instead of the elevator, or maybe trying to walk a little bit further than we're used to, maybe parking the car a little bit further away, so that we're walking a little bit more. So just things like that, right? Trying to make things a little bit more difficult, so that we are getting that strength in our bodies. And as I always say, with practice, you'd be really surprised what you can achieve. I have, people ask me all the time, be like, considering my condition, how quickly do you think I'll get better? How much do you think I'll get better? And for me, I always say, you know what, I can't promise anything, but I've seen people get a lot better when we didn't expect them to get a lot better. And the biggest kind of defining factor I have found in most people that get better, like really quickly and do really really well, it's often that motivation, right? So whether it's heart disease or diabetes or lung disease, or anything like that, it's that idea of like, are we willing to do a little bit of exercise kind of on a consistent basis? It's not about doing 2 hours of exercise once a week. It's about maybe trying to include 10-15 minutes worth of exercise a couple of times a day, right? And just getting your body used to motion and getting it going, because you'd be really surprised at how much our bodies actually need motion. The body is made for movement, and especially when it comes to things like high blood pressure, anxiety, osteoporosis, arthritis, muscle weakness, all of these things can be really, really helped through exercise. And just making sure that we are getting that body moving, we are um, just making sure that we are kind of keeping that body active, because our bodies really don't like it if we're not moving on a relatively consistent basis. That doesn't mean 24 hours a day you have to be moving, but just trying to make sure that we are moving on a regular basis. And that's going to look different for everybody, right? So maybe if you're super active and you're playing, pickleball 3 times a week, that is going to look different than maybe somebody who is a paraplegic, or somebody who maybe has had a recent stroke, or some other kind of medical condition, right? It's all going to look different, but still getting your body moving can be really, really helpful. If you ever want kind of one-on-one supports, and you ever want to ask very, very specific questions about your own medical history, feel free to contact me. We can always book a session, a virtual session, and kind of talk about those things and kind of see if there are things maybe in your community, or places that you can go to help with your physical activity journey. And then, do be aware that I do post my slides, most of my slides, on my website, and I do have a YouTube channel. So feel free to check that out. Check out previous recordings, and I will be kind of posting on a regular basis, trying to just really educate people on how to stay active. It's a really really big passion of mine to make sure that we are getting everybody active, whether that's seniors or people with different chronic health conditions. Like I said, it's so important to keep the body moving. So you do want to make sure we are staying active. So feel free to check out my YouTube channel if you are interested. Thanks for joining.